Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're continuing our chat with Chandler Copenhaver. Chandler is a director of business development, sales, and partnerships at Crowdox, a leading Kickstarter Pledge Management software company. Today, we're going to go through some discussions on prior campaigns and some learnings and maybe some what not to do's. So let's get into it now. Chandler, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
You know, this is round two, so very, very quickly, I want to get you to give people just a brief description of what is Crowdox before we get too deep into the woods. And I'll just encourage anybody that if you want to get real deep into Crowdox, check out episode 12 of our audio podcast, or you can just go on the Board Game Binge Facebook group. Just go into the media section and you can check out previous interviews and you can find Chandler's interview there. So Chandler, quickly, what is Crowdox?
And basically, we support crowdfunding creators, helping them with their Kickstarter and Indiegogo and other platforms, helping them to essentially kind of finalize that process. Crowdfunding is a pretty challenging and unique process, and it needs tools to reflect that. And so we have a set of tools that help the creator to organize all of the fulfillment and back end part of the shipping, of the organizing the details, selling add-ons. Basically, we help make the unsexy part of crowdfunding be a little bit more sexy. So
hey, anytime you can make something more sexy, that's a good thing, I think. So
exactly.
So last time we had this interview, right near the end, we just started getting to some of the meat and potatoes of it, like some of the key things that people might want to learn from looking at other campaigns that have been done before they do theirs. And I kind of tasked you with coming up with a list. We don't have to get an exact number, but let's start off. What's something that you've seen recently on one of these campaigns that you would say is something people should definitely do?
So, as a first thing, because I have a lot of things that will come to mind. I've talked to a lot of people in different circumstances. I mean, more than 2,000 creators at this point. And one thing that stands out pretty consistently is there's a lot of apprehension, right? A lot of whether it's board game or not, it doesn't really matter. Somebody's coming to the table to make a campaign on Kickstarter. The majority of them come to the table ready to make something, some creative process. Typically it's a product, right? Because we're on Kickstarter. Kickstarter's product-based. And most of us are in love with our idea, which is good and important and very, how do I say, it's invaluable, right, to be able to do this successfully and to do it correctly. But at the same time, what we often have is a lot of people aren't really here for the right reasons. They don't realize what they're getting into. And so really kind of, a main point of advice that I often end up getting to is like, well, do you know what you're here for? And it's really kind of pick your path, right? So board games, especially in the tabletop space, we have this even more uniquely categorized, because if it's a backpack or if it's one of these odds and ends that are being made, it's different than if you're making a tabletop game that's going to fit into an established community with established publishers and a lot of it's there's a community there, right? And we're just kind of plugging into what exists. And so as we make a game and we try to produce something new in this space, first kind of making sure that you know your path, I think, is a pretty invaluable set of information, because there's a lot of designers that I've worked with that love to design, but they actually found out the hard way that's like creating a business, like actually having to deal with like numbers and logistics and like all of these other things that come with this. And I just like to make cool stuff. I just like to make games, and I have a really good way of thinking about game design. And so those individuals tend to kind of show up to Kickstarter thinking like, this is an easy way to make money. I'm just going to like launch my game and boom, like I'm going to make 30 grand. I did the math, like I calculated it out. I'm going to make 30 grand in profit and in 1 month, and it's going to be awesome. Right. And that is the pipe dream that often we kind of fall into. And so it doesn't really matter what stage a particular person is in. I think just knowing or trying to understand or learn like about what is it I'm getting into, and knowing your path is really invaluable, because there are a lot of other options there are a lot of ways to that win condition, right? And we, as we seek to figure out our path to that win condition, most people don't even know what they're after in the first place. Don't know what they're, what's going to trigger the end game, right? So I think that's a pretty key element to tackle.
So when you look at that, and I mean, I see this a lot when you talk to people and they, they'll say, oh my God, Kickstarter's great. Like, just go to the Crowdox page and look at their clients, look at all the guys making millions of dollars, right? Like,
Yeah.
man, if my game is better than that one I just saw, so I'm sure if I go on Kickstarter, even if I can do a quarter of that, that would be great. So setting that path or charting that path, is it, when you say getting into it for the right reasons, is it about actually getting a game to market? Is that what it basically all boils down to? So it's not necessarily about just getting a game made, or it's not just about, hey, I just want to make a bunch of money. But what I'm hearing you say is the path is to be very clear on, okay, we have to get this product to market in a successful way, and then defining what is success, right? And how does that model work out? I think sometimes is what people don't necessarily do is also map out what is failure, right? What does failure look like, and what is the plan when you fail, right? Because if you fail, then the math is very different, right? It's easy to do math saying, based on us succeeding, we're going to make X amount of dollars, and here's how much of my profit's going to be. But if you don't hit your objective and you're not successful, did you invest money in? Did you sign contracts and all these other things that you're now tied into? So is there kind of a negative impact by not being successful? And I think the key you want for Kickstarter specifically is if it's a fail, then, or say a not fund, I hate to use the word fail, but if you don't fund, then hopefully that's a break even, right? It's not a significant loss.
So I love talking about failure, actually, and it's really, it's counterintuitive, right? We're trying to figure out how to be successful, but failure is, I am in love with Japanese culture, and there's kind of an element of Japanese culture, as well as really many cultures, ancient cultures, that have this relationship with death, right? There's this relationship that is actually different than we relate to with death, I think, especially in the US, as a culture. Death is purely negative, failure is purely negative, but there's actually a completely different relationship with a lot of those cultures to death or to failure. And I think coming to grips with the fact that you are more likely to fail at Kickstarter than you are to succeed, first and foremost, is an important piece of information, right? Like, the number of campaigns that are live at any given time on Kickstarter, somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 campaigns live on Kickstarter any given time. That's dropped a little bit. Pandemic didn't help, kind of made some waves there, but somewhere in that range, you got a lot of other people doing similar things and feel the same way. And that's not to say that a great idea or a great product can't come out of that, but just knowing that failure is kind of a part of the package. And I think another element, especially in the tabletop industry, because I think I've shared this before, but I work with categories of all kinds, products of all kinds.
And not just Kickstarter either. You even work with Indiegogo as well, right?
That's right. Yeah. Different platforms, even there's some Japanese platforms, there's some platform. Anyway, the point being is that the variety is actually really fun, because the tabletop industry is unquestionably the most educated category, the most educated group of creators and backers that exists in the crowdfunding space, without question. And part of that is because it's already kind of built well for a community, right? Like, we all play games together. All of the publishers of that make the games tend to have really good relationships. They interact and communicate well. There's kind of this co-opetition that happens that is unique. And I absolutely love it. And so that's what has kind of brought the intelligence, emotional intelligence, or kind of the overall understanding about crowdfunding to a higher level. It's really exciting, but it comes with its own inherent flaws and challenges, right? And so as I'm a creator, I pick this path, I decide to go do crowdfunding and kind of venture off on my own to become, to publish my own games. It's like we're talking about, I do need to not only realize, I think most people kind of have some sense that, like, I could fail. And that actually is what holds back the most of us, right? Holds back most of us from doing great things, is this fear of failure. I think kind of embracing the fact that I need to fail, and I need to fail quickly, and I need to fail a lot is something that I learned when I was pretty young, and taught by my dad and some, people in my life, that like I think has helped me just in a non-professional sense and in a professional sense, is that we need to fail quickly and as often as possible, which sounds so counterintuitive. But
Yeah.
if we consider like everything that takes somebody to a success, everybody loves the success story of I only had $4 in my pocket, and this whole thing. But it's because that's kind of how it works. Like we go through a lot of adversity in order to get to the gold prize. And to kind of illustrate that, one of the best, Kickstarter itself as a company, for what it stands represents,
Yeah.
the Kickstarter started in 2009. I mean, just right after the Great Recession here in the U.S., we had,
Yep.
Actually around the world, there was a recession or a depression period. And I think adversity brings out some of the best innovation. And, we learn more from those experiences than we do from, when things are kind of chill and, doing well. So, I'm all for failure. It's actually rather interesting if you take tabletop campaigns on Kickstarter and you look across them, you actually have a higher repeat rate than other campaigns. So I've worked with, thousands of these campaigns, and a lot of the design or technology products that we all see on Kickstarter that are really consistent.
Yeah.
If one of those fails, the likelihood of them like relaunching their campaign and trying again is almost next to zero. I mean, it's like most of them never do it.
Yeah.
And in fairness, a lot of them probably figure out a new path. They completely just think of like, well, maybe I'll go direct to e-commerce. Maybe I'll get an investor. Maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll do that. But what I do love is that on Kickstarter, though, we do have a lot of tabletop creators that they try 2 or 3 times, relaunching the same campaign, learning from their mistakes, trying to adapt and adjust. And I think it's fantastic. It's super good.
Do you think that's partly because Kickstarter has become almost the marketplace for the industry? So for the indie industry, right? You can sell online, you can sell, at retail, if you can find a distributor that'll carry your game, and there's limited number of distributors, and there's only so many big players that can actually make it all the way to retail. And what I'm seeing is a lot of indie publishers exclusively almost use Kickstarter as their marketplace, right? So there's a lot of risk that's taken out of the system, right? Because you're pre-getting the almost like pre-bookings before you go and manufacture. If you do it right,
pre-sales,
basically.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that kind of continuing to come back at it over and over again is partly because of the fact that it's the marketplace. I think it's definitely part of the fact that, as you're saying, these competition, cooperation dynamic, it's a weird dynamic, but it exists where you see a lot of people trying to prop up other players, right? And you often will see competitors saying, "Hey, man, let me see what can I do to help you out? How can I lend a hand?" So I think for me, the biggest shame is when I see somebody go back and relaunch a game and they change nothing.
Correct. Yep.
That is almost criminal.
Yeah, that's where it's sadly, like, what you end up getting is kind of in a sense deserved, right? Like the purpose and point of failure is really so that you can adapt and learn. And yeah, I've worked with let's just imagine for a moment that you were guaranteed to succeed. Your Kickstarter was guaranteed to succeed. Didn't matter what it looked like, didn't matter what you did. Like, not only would we have quality just tank and have all these issues, product like wouldn't ever be fulfilled. We'd end up getting a lot of garbage out of people because it's like a kind of a quick thing. I've actually had a couple of scenarios where there were some projects that I, was aware of that they basically got funded automatically and the products weren't good. And it was really, really bad. I mean, it's bad for the entire ecosystem of this crowdfunding space, but it's bad for the creator because they get a pat on the back when it's not exactly, thrilling and exciting. And it's kind of hard, right? Because especially in the tabletop space, we have a lot of games being made, and games are also kind of easy to make. Now, I'm not saying that it's easy to produce a game. It's not easy to manufacture and do a Kickstarter and do everything related there, but it is somewhat easy to come up with a concept that allows a game to function, right? I mean, that's the beauty of game design, is that you can take something that exists and make it different and better, and add kind of the game theory to it.
I think there's probably
There's,
many publishers that would actually agree with that. They would say, you know, making the game is the easy part, right?
Mhm.
It's all the other stuff, the logistics, the manufacturing, the Kickstarter, the audience building, and so forth.
Yeah.
So sorry, continue.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like and they definitely would, because at the end of the day, just producing, basically what is a process that you follow to have an enjoyable
Yeah.
experience, like that kind of is easy. I mean, I shouldn't say it's easy, because I respect it. I respect the heck out of it. I'm not good at it and some of those parts to it. But I'm just saying that part of it is not the difficult part, right? And that is not the barrier to entry. There's a lot of people that have those games. And so as we kind of look at this pick your path concept, I think that, there are a pretty good sizable chunk of people that have produced a game that should consider looking for a publisher, that should consider a path that maybe is allowing them to focus on what they are great at doing, which is making something and kind of coming up with a novel concept, and really maybe world building or whatever it is, and focus in and hone in on what they're great at, and lean on those that are great at what they do, and so kind of that merging of the minds can, I think, come out of that. It's not to say that, though, we shouldn't have a ton of people doing their best to try their hand at crowdfunding and at making their own publishing company or that kind of a thing, but it can be there's a lot to it, and it's not going to be the easy path. You're picking kind of the hard path.
So I got Mike Bruner's in the lobby listening. I know he's a big fan of Crowdox. He used it for his game as well. Queen
So,
Bee,
Mike,
which I believe Queen Bee
I
is
just got
now.
a shipping notification.
Did you? I'm still waiting for mine, but I tell you, when I get it, I'll be doing a cartwheels. I can't wait. But he says, it's kind of like this. A lot of the problem with a lot of games is you got this kind of tree falling in the woods situation, right? Where you may have the best game ever, but if you haven't found a way to build that audience ahead of time, you may be setting yourself up for a lot of disappointment. And that kind of leads me into another question and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, is do you see audience building almost like a double-edged sword, where in some cases you might have amazing games, but the people haven't necessarily built the audience up in order to get people to even know about it? But on the flip side, I'm wondering if, from your experience, have you seen cases where there's games that aren't great, but because the person launching it has such a strong IP in another area, or strong, YouTube following, or they have some other huge audience they've built up somewhere else, they've been able to leverage that to get, quite substantial success on Kickstarter?
Yeah, it happens all the time. It's absolutely super common, and I applaud that, right? Like, because the amount of work and energy and resources and time that goes into even what I might consider, like, I don't love that game. Like, if I'm in that, if I'm not in love with the product, that doesn't necessarily mean that they failed, because again, that win condition, that end objective that they're after might have been, different. And so I think that's why it's so important to kind of key in on that. If somebody's really looking at the long term to build a reputable brand, to kind of, be here for the long haul and make, and bring forward the next, the next top 10 game, the next, big product, like, well, if that's the end condition, the end objective, like, then what I do to get there is going to be pretty different, and it's going to be a longer process. But I can produce something quickly and throw it out there, or throw a lot of money into something, like, somebody that happens to be sitting on a good chunk of change, that wants to invest that into this front end marketing machine, and produce really great images and everything that goes with that, but the end product itself doesn't actually do well at the table. Like, that kind of stuff happens actually quite a bit, and I think that I think it's par for the course. You just it's going to happen that way, and that's why I think it's so important that we kind of do try to figure ourselves out. The more that people can also realize that, if you go this path, you are becoming a business owner, period. A lot of people don't really think about that, or try to avoid, they're kind of worried about that. Maybe it's scary. Maybe the I got to pay taxes. Like some of these
Yep.
things that come with that can be overwhelming and scary. And so, finding a good partner, somebody you can trust that you can bring in to support the other parts of the business that you maybe are not as skilled at. Like there are definite paths to success, even if you're just the guy that knows how to make things really cool or make things look really good or whatever. There's a path to get there, but have the patience and take the time to make it happen.
And I think dig deep too, right? So when I've talked to some developers who have, looked at some of these campaigns I just talked about where you see these huge
Yep.
numbers and they're like, the game doesn't really look that great, but man, they got some massive numbers and wow, that looks like that's the first, game these people have done. I always say, look behind the curtain, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
it is extremely rare that a massive following on Kickstarter is going to materialize out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
That crowd has come from somewhere, right? So it's come
Mm-hmm.
from another property or something else. So, it's important to do your homework and discover how did they build that audience up? Because if you don't,
Yeah.
you might set yourself up for the certain level of expectation or not do the work that you need to do in terms of building an audience of your own because you're
Mm-hmm.
under this false perception from some of these other things you've seen. What
Yeah.
would you say would be, of all the campaigns you've done, the biggest failure to success story that you've had in the board game industry specifically, where you've seen something just crash and burn and then, you've relaunched them and then they just smashed it out of the park?
I have to think of that specifically. I know that there's actually been a fair number. I mean, a good example, really just a general one that I could highlight, I've had the chance to work with, for example, like is the Chip Theory guys. If you look at like their Kickstarters, you go
Mhm.
through, and really a lot of the bigger publishers or these companies that really they can, Kickstarter was at the root of their company being, coming into existence. And there's quite a few of those now in the industry. And of those, a lot of them, you can look at the first Kickstarter they ever launched, and my guess, my bet is that it's probably like, tiny compared to the big one that just launched that made $1 million. Well, they went through like 40, $60,000 campaigns, or not 40, four $60,000 campaigns, or
Right.
they, a lot of these creators kind of, it's a process. And part of it is community building, like you just described. I think that would be probably my second main point would be to like, did you start building your community yet? When's the best time to start? Well, yesterday, right? Like
Yeah.
you want to be building that as soon as possible. And it's not easy to do. It can be sometimes challenging. We are kind of oversaturated. There's a lot of things going on. And so
Yeah.
getting that attention can be really challenging. But it is a combination of what we talked about. Like there are a lot of products that are not great, but that are well marketed. And so let's learn from that. And how do I market like that? And in order to get people in front of my game that is great. And to be fair, there's a lot of board games that we've all played that the presentation is actually terrible.
Yeah.
Like the components are bad, or the artwork is really old and outdated and not good looking. Some of the best games and most popular games are that way. So it's not it's not the artwork that sells only. The things that last long term and that people really like long term are things that hold up actually mechanically.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a key aspect that I've worked with a lot of creators that they attempt the launch, they fail, kind of like we're talking about. I've had others that reposition. So, for example, I worked with Smirk and Dagger recently,
Okay.
right? And
Yep.
with Kurt, and he's a great guy. I've known him for a little while, and it's cool to watch him because he's actually new to Kickstarter, but he's a well-established publisher. Does really makes
Especially
some really great
retail.
games.
Yep.
Yeah, does amazing, and so it was exciting to see him kind of try his hand at Kickstarter, at crowdfunding. And the one that he just did recently did very well. And that by itself is its own case study, because the guys that made that game, they'd been working on it for years, like 3 years, and they had taken it to all sorts of conventions, had won the SaltCon. I'm in Utah, so we
Is
have
the Night
this,
Cage? Is you talking about the Night Cage?
the Night Cage. Yeah, sorry, I
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah, we
Yeah,
had those guys on the podcast. Yeah, yeah,
you did. Yep.
yeah. Cool
Yeah,
game.
and
Yeah,
cool game. Those guys
yeah,
are awesome, and it's kind of a good example of somebody that figured out their path, right? Like they ended
yeah.
up. I think at one point they probably planned on doing their own Kickstarter and planned on kind of going this path, but teamed up with Kurt, and they had a great Kickstarter. They yeah, it was only Kurt's second Kickstarter too, so but they did great. So there's kind of a lessons to be learned from both of those perspectives, actually.
Yeah. History tends to repeat itself. Is there something that you find you're telling your clients almost, every other client you talk to is like, guys, you gotta, you gotta consider X, Y, Z. Is there something that you find yourself repeating a lot when you're doing these different Kickstarters with some of specifically in the board game industry?
And once you're to that point that you're coming up to the table and you have your game and you're starting to get it played and you're starting to get, you've picked your path, you're maybe planning the Kickstarter and you're doing that, you're going down that path.
Yep.
Probably the single most forgotten piece typically is the logistics, right? Which is what I'm involved with Crowdox,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, like, shipping is the number one area that people lose money on these crowdfunding campaigns. It doesn't matter how successful they are, how big they went, they raised $2 million or $10,000. Like, that part doesn't really matter, because it's the area where the cost is fixed, the cost is continually going up, the cost is much more expensive internationally than it is domestically. There are a lot of taxes and customs and duties and VAT and all these things that kind of get mixed and mingled in there. And it's for the average individual, even for myself, like, knowing everything about that is really difficult. And so for people that don't do their homework, their due diligence, their preparation properly,
Yeah.
they're the ones that bite it the most. And I've known people that have legitimately had to take out second mortgage on their home just to pay for the shipping costs of their Kickstarter, even though they raised six figures. Right. So it can be the biggest crux.
Well, here's an example, a very real example from where we currently are at with the shipping rates changing worldwide dramatically since COVID hit. We had a game, Queen of Scots, that we launched on our last Kickstarter. And at the time we thought, we're just going to focus on North America. Maybe later we'll get into the UK and other areas.
Yeah.
Small campaign. So we get all the games, we did all of our fulfillment. All the rest of the games are here in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I can ship down to Amazon, no problem in the USA. So I called up Quartermaster in the UK and said, you know what, I think this game might actually be good for, the UK. I've got my Amazon store there. I'm going to send some inventory to you. I was shocked. I sent 2 cases. So I put it in one big giant case of games. So it was about 80 games. The cost for me to send 80 games to the UK from Canada was the same as had I shipped a skid directly from the manufacturer to the UK. Right. So when I look back on that, of course, kicking myself saying, gosh, when I should have just allocated some of the inventory and just said, you know what, I'll figure it out when it gets there, and carved off some inventory to go straight to the UK. So, and I've done a few of these now. So, you can get caught very, very easily. And these are the things you really got to think about, where once a campaign's done and the inventory I have left over, where do I want to sell it? Because if it's not local and you plan on selling it in different parts of the world, you better think about that ahead of time. Now, luckily for me, it's a very small campaign, not a ton of inventory. But again, one of these cases where if you have somebody that's doing, thousands of games, that can get crazy costly, right? So.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's crazy because also, when it comes down to shipping, we also don't really know what our box size and weight will actually be. We know if we've done our homework properly, we get a good idea of what it is. We get a good production level, like prototype or something that we can kind of get a good sense of those things. But for the majority, even getting that sometimes is overly expensive or too difficult or, not ready for. And so, even that, if the dimensions change even a little bit, that's that could be putting you from this box to this box, and now your price went up by X amount. The same is true for weight. If your components changed, then now you're using a thicker cardboard because of that stretch goal you decided to throw in there last minute, and you happen to have these metal coins now instead of the cardboard. Like, those little things actually add up a lot and tend to hit people hard. So there's all these kind of little hidden things that I am proud to say that on average, most people are more educated on that area amongst the tabletop community than any other on Kickstarter, without question.
I think in that regard too, you want to make sure that when you're planning your shipping costs by weight and certainly by cubic size, understand the pricing bands, right? Because if most of the mail systems around the world have certain breaks based on weight, right? So if you're at 1 kilo, it's going to be one rate.
Yep.
If it's 1.1 kilo, guess what? You're in the next bracket, and that might cost you an extra $5 to ship it. So that extra handful of metal coins or a little upgrade might have just cooked you on the shipping cost. So, so where you go from here? Where's Crowdox? I'm sure you have. I know for a fact you've got a ton of games that you guys have underway on the different platforms. Is there any big game that you're working on that people should be looking out for? Or?
Right now we just had a bunch of campaigns that we've been working with. We actually have a weekly newsletter that goes out that highlights all these awesome campaigns specifically just for the games and geek community, a lot of board games and video games and comic books. Excuse me. So that we always are featuring stuff on there. I had the chance to kind of work. You had Dan Blacklock on the show for Token Sesame, and him and I have had a chance to work together on that campaign somewhat, and which is, I'm excited to get that, kind of
he crushed
keep the
goal.
table. Oh yeah.
I just saw the announcement today. He hit like 550,000 over this 400. Like it was.
Yeah. He hit 400,000, I think, which was
US,
awesome.
yeah. So in Canada, that
US,
translates to like, I think 555. Yeah, that's
$500,000 for Canadians. Yeah, it always looks a little bit better, right?
Yeah, of course.
but yeah, there's always something cool going on Kickstarter. A lot of people ask me because, obviously we work with all these different campaigns. They ask, like, is it because are we looking for just like the big project like with Crowdox? Are we just looking for the big guys and the guys that are raising tons of money? And the truth is, like, no, at the end of the day, we all creators need some of this support and this help. And some of the best games I have and have played weren't necessarily the biggest winners. And in fact, there's a lot of games that end up becoming really big that didn't
runaway
start
successes.
out that way.
Yeah.
I mean, let's see, I think it's up there, Gloomhaven, right? Like,
even
though Gloomhaven's the beast that it is now, it didn't start that way. The first campaign was $100,000, I think. So that should give hope to kind of the standard Joe, like all of us are actually, to do whatever we can to innovate.
Even though Wingspan wasn't Kickstarter, it's still like the demand far exceeded what they didn't even have enough games made. They had to go make some more, right? So. And then you also have a Discord channel, I believe, right, through Crowdox?
So that's actually just the personal gaming Discord, but yeah, we can do some hangouts there. Crowdox has sponsored it in the past, but yeah, we do some gameplay and just to hang out for people that want to hang out.
So if somebody wants to become part of the Crowdox community to kind of follow along with what you guys are doing, because there's always different projects, and I always see your email updates where there's lots of great info in there. How best would they get on that list, or would they connect with you guys?
Yeah, the best way is we do have a newsletter. You go to Crowdox. There's a button there that you can subscribe to that. You can jump in, and I believe we on our Facebook page. Just reach out to me directly if you want to. I'm more than happy to help anyone that's looking at crowdfunding. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, any of the major sites. So
awesome. Well, hey, that was over a half hour, and it goes by so fast when we chat about this stuff. I hope we can get you back on this podcast again for round 3, maybe in a few months.
Yeah.
I want to wish you all the best to you and your family, and keep doing what you guys are doing. You guys are obviously helping a lot of people, reach their dreams on Kickstarter. So I just wanted to thank you for that on behalf of the community.
I appreciate it. Thanks, man.
All right. Take care. Cheers.
Okay, have a good one.